Fading lights. Ethan Caldwell was the kind of CEO people admired and feared in equal measure. At just 42, he had built a tech empire worth billions, his name synonymous with success. His office, perched high above the city skyline, overlooked the world he had conquered. Yet, despite the wealth, the power, and the influence, something felt hollow. The boardroom applause, the endless acquisitions, the luxurious solitude of his penthouse, none of it filled the growing void in his chest. He had always assumed time was on his side, that someday he'd slow down and figure out what was missing. But the universe had other plans. A routine checkup turned into a nightmare when the doctor's voice, clinical yet apologetic, told him what he refused to believe: he was dying. Across the city, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, Naomi Mathoni adjusted the loose hem of her worn-out dress. At 19, life had already shown her its cruelest side. After her mother's death, her father had remarried a woman who saw Naomi as nothing more than an inconvenience. Chores piled up, her stepmother's insults cut deep, and any dreams of college faded with each passing year. She worked odd jobs, cleaning, selling second-hand clothes, and sometimes skipping meals to save a few coins. But the world didn't slow down for the poor. Every morning, she took the same dusty path to town, hoping to find a day's work, hoping to escape, though she didn't know how. Ethan, numb from his diagnosis, began to see the world differently. The relentless board meetings and shareholder demands no longer mattered. He found himself walking aimlessly through the streets he had long ignored, past the noise of life he had once been too busy to notice. It was during one of these walks that he saw her. Naomi was standing by a roadside stall, carefully counting coins in her palm, her brows creased in frustration. She was short a few shillings for bread. Without thinking, Ethan reached into his pocket, handed the vendor a note, and walked away before she could protest. Naomi stared at the man's retreating figure, confusion written all over her face. Who was he? Why had he helped without asking for anything in return? She wasn't used to kindness without a cost. The next day, she saw him again, sitting on a bench in the park, staring at nothing. Something about his posture, tired, detached, felt familiar. It was the look of someone carrying an invisible weight. On impulse, she approached him. "Thank you for yesterday," she said softly. Ethan turned, surprised. It had been years since someone spoke to him without an agenda. He simply nodded, unsure what else to say. Their encounters became routine. Naomi would find him sitting in the park, sometimes with coffee, sometimes lost in thought. Slowly, she began to talk about herself, about her mother, about the life she wanted but couldn't reach. Ethan, for the first time in years, listened, really listened. In her words, he found an echo of something he had long forgotten: longing, hope, and the desperate desire to matter. He never told her about his illness. He didn't want pity. Instead, he offered advice, told her to dream bigger, to believe that fate wasn't just for the privileged. One evening, Naomi arrived at the park to find Ethan pale and trembling. Instinctively, she reached for him, alarmed by how cold his skin felt. "Are you okay?" she asked. He forced a smile, dismissing her concern, but she wasn't convinced. The next day, she followed him, weaving through the city until she saw him enter a hospital. Her heart pounded as she waited outside, debating whether to go in. When he finally emerged, looking drained and hollow, she knew. He was sick, very sick. Confronting him wasn't easy. He avoided her for days, but Naomi was relentless. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she said when she finally cornered him. "Now it's my turn." Ethan laughed, the sound brittle. "There's nothing to help, Naomi. Some things can't be fixed." But she didn't leave. Instead, she stayed, becoming the one thing money had never been able to buy him: genuine companionship. As the weeks passed, his strength waned. Naomi refused to abandon him, bringing him simple joys: a thermos of warm tea, old books from street vendors, stories that made him smile despite the pain. He had spent a lifetime chasing things that no longer mattered, yet here, in these stolen moments, he found something real. It terrified him how much he had grown to care. One morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft golds and pinks, Naomi sat beside Ethan in the park, his hand loosely wrapped around hers. His breathing was slower now, his body tired. "I don't want you to waste your life waiting for miracles," he murmured. "Promise me, you'll fight for yourself." Naomi blinked back tears, nodding even though her heart was breaking. When she looked at him again, his eyes were closed, his grip slackening. The wind carried his final breath like a whisper. Ethan Caldwell, the man who had everything yet nothing, was gone. But he didn't leave Naomi empty. He left her with a belief she had never dared hold onto, that she was meant for more. And as she walked away from the park that day, she knew she would fight, not just for herself, but for the promise she had made to a dying man who had finally learned what truly mattered.